Everyone's telling you the same story right now. The Strait of Hormuz is closed, oil markets are in chaos, governments across Europe and Asia are holding emergency meetings, and the narrative being pushed from every financial news desk is a clean, simple one. This is bad for the global economy, but America is actually positioned to win from it. It's a compelling story. It's also only half true. And the half they're leaving out is the part that directly affects your grocery bill, your gas prices, your job, and every product sitting on the shelf at your local Walmart. Both are true, and you need to understand both. I'm Jimmy, and this is Finance Misfires, where we don't just cover the headline, we cover what's underneath it. Because right now, there are two completely real stories happening simultaneously at the Strait of Hormuz. One where America genuinely has structural advantages, and one where the average American gets absolutely hammered anyway. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched military operations against Iran. Iran's response was immediate. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officially declared the Strait of Hormuz closed, began attacking commercial vessels, and reportedly started laying naval mines in the waterway. Since then, shipping traffic through the strait has been largely blocked, with Iran launching over 21 confirmed attacks on merchant ships. The scale of what's moving through that narrow strip of water is genuinely staggering. In 2024, oil flow through the strait averaged 20 million barrels per day, roughly 20% of global petroleum liquids consumption. Around 1/5 of global liquefied natural gas trade also transited the Strait of Hormuz in 2024, primarily from Qatar. And it's not just oil and gas. The strait also transits around 45% of global sulfur exports, which is needed in the production of fertilizer and the refining of metals, including copper, cobalt, and nickel. U.S. government officials and Wall Street analysts are already beginning to consider the prospect that oil prices might surge to an unprecedented $200 a barrel. The Dallas Fed ran the numbers on what a full closure actually means. A closure that removes close to 20% of global oil supplies is expected to raise the average WTI oil price to $98 per barrel and lower global real GDP growth by an annualized 2.9 percentage points. And that's the conservative scenario. So let's talk about who's actually getting hit and who isn't. Let's start with the argument that's been making the rounds, because it isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. The original narrative goes like this. 20 years ago, America was heavily dependent on foreign oil. Roughly 60% of total U.S. petroleum consumption came from imports. So when global supply got disrupted, the impact was direct and immediate. Prices spiked, inflation surged, the economy hit the brakes. That version of America no longer exists. Over the past 2 decades, the shale revolution completely rewrote America's energy position. New drilling techniques unlocked massive domestic reserves. Production boomed, and the United States didn't just reduce its import dependence, it flipped the script entirely. The United States imported only about 0.5 million barrels of crude oil from Persian Gulf countries through the Strait of Hormuz in 2024, accounting for just 2% of total U.S. petroleum liquids consumption. 2%, that's the actual U.S. exposure to a Hormuz disruption on the supply side. Meanwhile, 84% of the crude oil and condensate moving through the strait went to Asian markets in 2024. With Qatar, China, India, Japan, and South Korea accounting for a combined 69% of all Hormuz crude flows. So, when supply tightens and prices rise, American energy producers and LNG exporters are sitting on the winning side of that trade. Higher prices don't just hurt, they generate revenue for the world's largest oil and gas producer. The U.S. is also the world's biggest LNG exporter, and its domestic gas market is relatively insulated from the war due to its massive production. The market is already reflecting this. Venture Global, one of the fastest-growing U.S. LNG exporters, has seen its stock jump nearly 40% in the past month. Chineri Energy, the largest LNG exporter in the country, is up close to 15%. Energy companies are printing money right now. while the rest of the world scrambles. On the surface, the thesis holds. America produces the stuff everyone else desperately needs. Scarcity creates opportunity. The same shock that's crushing Asian economies is padding the balance sheets of American energy companies. But here's where the story starts falling apart. Yes, America produces a lot of oil. But here's something most people gloss over. America can't actually refine all the oil it produces. The country's refinery infrastructure was built decades ago for a different type of crude than what shale fields produce today. So American oil gets exported while American refineries still need to import from elsewhere. The domestic boom is real, but America can't just flip a switch and replace lost global supply. The infrastructure doesn't work that way. That's a serious dent in the America wins clean story. And this is where it gets interesting, because most people covering this story stopped reading right here. The real damage is what comes next. Stick with me. Here's the part that the America wins narrative conveniently skips over. Oil is globally priced, which means when supply tightens anywhere on the planet, prices rise everywhere, including at every gas station in every American city, including in the supply chains of every American manufacturer, including in the operating costs of every American business that moves goods from point A to point B. Higher energy prices don't just hurt foreign economies, they suck money out of the broader American economy and funnel it into energy companies, which means your heating bill goes up, your grocery bill goes up. Everything that gets manufactured, shipped, or transported goes up. And American consumers were already on the edge before this started. Credit card debt just hit a record $1.28 trillion. The personal savings rate has dropped to around 4.5%. Cumulative inflation since 2020 is already sitting above 25%. The average American household was not walking into this crisis from a position of financial strength. They were walking in already stretched thin. And now energy prices are about to squeeze what little cushion was left. At $170 a barrel, the impact on inflation and growth roughly doubles, a stagflationary shock that economists are already starting to whisper about. Stagflation, rising prices and slowing growth at the same time. The last time America lived through this was the 1970s, and it took a decade to climb out. The Fed's nightmare scenario. Because you can't cut rates to stimulate the economy without making inflation worse, and you can't raise rates to fight inflation without crushing growth further. There is no good move on that chessboard. And the damage goes way beyond oil prices at the pump. From the metals market to agriculture and autos, a de facto closure of the strait ripples through business sectors in both the U.S. and world economy. Start with fertilizer. Roughly 1/3 of global fertilizer trade transits the Strait of Hormuz, including large volumes of nitrogen exports. New Orleans fertilizer hub urea prices have already risen from $475 per metric ton to $680 per metric ton. Remember, this is exactly the part the America Wins headline isn't telling you. That's not an abstract financial number. That's the direct input cost for corn and soybean farmers across the American Midwest, right in the middle of spring planting season. When fertilizer prices spike during planting season, food prices follow within months. The grocery store impact is coming. It's just on a delay. Then there's aluminum. In 2025, the Middle East accounted for roughly 21% of unwrought aluminum imports into the U.S., and those percentages have been rising. Aluminum goes into cars, construction, packaging, electronics. Every sector that touches aluminum is about to feel this. And it keeps going. The synthetic graphite used in electric vehicle battery anodes relies on petroleum coke as its primary feedstock, and oil refineries may opt to focus on higher value outputs while prices rally, tightening availability of the petroleum coke byproduct. The EV transition, the AI build-out, the semiconductor supply chain, all of it runs on materials flowing through or dependent on that narrow strip of water, and none of that shows up in the simple America Wins framing.
Major global maritime shipping companies Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd have already suspended Mideast routes. Port congestion is building. Container availability is tightening. The initial ocean impact may take 10 to 14 days to appear, but the real pressure typically
hits within 2 to 5 weeks as diverted containers arrive in clusters. Terminal congestion rises and drayage demand outpaces truck and chassis availability. The stuff sitting on shelves right now was ordered weeks ago. The shortage hits later, and when it does, it hits American consumers directly. Now here's the twist that almost nobody is talking about, and it changes the entire geopolitical picture. Is China the biggest loser here? Yeah, structurally that's true. China receives about a third of its oil via the Strait of Hormuz and had about 1 billion barrels in oil reserves, a few months of supply. A prolonged disruption isn't just a price problem for China, it's a supply problem, and those are completely different animals. Higher prices slow you down, losing access to your energy supply altogether. That's when factories stop, production stalls, and the industrial engine of the world's second-largest economy starts seizing up. Iran has continued letting Chinese tankers pass. Iran's oil exports to China reportedly increased to around 2.1 million barrels per day in early March 2026. There are even reports floating around of Iran proposing a toll system where ships pay in Chinese yuan to transit the strait. If that dynamic holds, China's supply disruption is significantly softer than the headline suggests, and the geopolitical pressure the U.S. thought it was applying to China through this conflict gets a lot more complicated. This doesn't mean China is fine. Their reserves buy them time, not immunity. A disruption lasting 6 months or longer moves from inconvenience to structural damage, regardless of any workarounds. But the clean narrative of America wins is a significant oversimplification of what's actually playing out. Here's the honest systems thinking read on this entire situation. America has real structural advantages in this crisis: the largest oil producer on the planet, the largest LNG exporter, minimal direct Hormuz exposure on the supply side, energy companies generating record revenue. These are facts, not spin. And America has real structural vulnerabilities that are already materializing. The impact on global growth will remain negative through year-end 2026, regardless of how quickly the strait reopens. Fertilizer prices spiking into planting season, aluminum, chemicals, and industrial inputs all repricing upward, supply chain congestion building in real time, and an American consumer base that was already running on fumes before the first shot was fired. The America wins framing isn't wrong, it's just dangerously incomplete. Because winning on the energy production side while simultaneously getting hammered on the consumer cost side, the supply chain side, and the inflation side, that's not winning. That's winning one battle while quietly losing several others at the same time. The overall global economic impacts will depend on the duration and scale of the disruption, and reducing risks requires de-escalation and safeguarding maritime transport. The longer this drags on, the more the America is insulated argument erodes, as no economy is an island when 20% of global oil supply disappears from the market simultaneously. The here isn't that the conflict happened. Geopolitical conflicts happen. The real misfire, and this is squarely in finance misfires territory, is the collective failure to communicate the full picture to the American public.
The downstream hits on food prices, manufacturing inputs, AI infrastructure costs, and household budgets aren't abstract risks. They're already in motion. They just haven't shown up on your receipt yet. This is exactly the kind of story that gets oversimplified into a clean take, because clean takes get clicks. America is the winner, China is the loser, oil producers cashing in, crisis contained. But the systems underneath that story are messier, more interconnected, and more consequential for ordinary Americans than any single narrative captures. And that gap between what's being reported and what's actually happening is exactly what Finance Misfires exists to cover. If this broke it down in a way that actually made sense, drop a like, leave a comment telling me which part hit hardest for you, and share it with someone who's still running with the America Wins Clean headline. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this, where we take the story everyone's already telling and show you what's sitting underneath it. I'm Jimmy. The strait may be closed, but your eyes don't have to be. I'll see you in the next one.